Hi, I'm Silver Pen, and welcome to my very first episode of Three Silver Tales. This is a series where I share original short stories, written, voiced, and created by me. These stories are my original work. Please do not repost them, claim them, or try to profit from them as I pour a lot of heart into each word. Today's theme is romance in nature. Now let's settle in and begin the first tale. Back home. Why is it I only get good ideas when I'm smashed or delirious with lack of sleep? I think God likes playing that little prank on writers. He only bestows inspiration when we lack the motor skills to play God ourselves. I'm staring at a rum bottle and wondering if a few swigs might help me start. But I've already conceded with my laptop. We agree. No false muses tonight. My life's too short. I've only finished 2 decades and I have nothing to write about. Wonder what it's like to be old. What it's like to be 87 years old with all the simplicity of youth gone. If I had 87 years of living, I could write for the rest of my life, even though no one would listen. But I still have to talk. You're still expecting a story from me even though I've got nothing. I stick my tongue out at the rum. My laptop hums appreciatively, and I look out the window. I don't like trees here. They're weird. Trunks rest in long rows of tree soldiers, shaped by human generals. They stand no chance against the concrete. Trucks beep, rock music blares. We yell. They're silent. I feel bad for the trees here. They were drafted. I like the trees back home better. If a tree grew, it grew because it wanted to. Nature wasn't a word back home. It wasn't foreign because it spoke. The trees creaked and swayed. The high branches clattered together in spontaneous chorus. A buck grunted to his doe as she mewed consent. The hunter looks on holding his 24mm rifle. A small black woodpecker digs for grubs in a dead white pine. A pack of coy dogs howl instructions to bring in the kill. A gray fox mourns in the road where its mate was hit by a teenager going too fast. He was from the city. He didn't even stop to say sorry. People from the cities forget there are people here. The mountains are not a backdrop because we are part of them. We are part of the precious backdrop, but we aren't remembered as more than an afterthought. Like mountains, we are stuck behind the actors. I played a tree in theater club once. Was the weirdest role I ever played. The telephone lines are old back home. They haven't been changed since the 60s. We don't even have cable. Sometimes they are so brittle they break if a bluebird lands on them. How do the electric companies expect them to fare against a thunderstorm? You know when you look outside and watch the lightning strike the mountain? That's my house it's hitting. It's as dark as can be, and suddenly the whole room is lit up like the sun. The thunder is right there too. If you ever put on a heavy metal song, turn the radio all the way up and put your ear to the speaker and press play. You know how loud that thunder is. Then you are plunged into darkness, and the smell of ozone reaches your nostrils. You can hear your mother and father swearing upstairs. You look outside to see your favorite climbing tree cut right down the middle like a split cucumber. Your little sister hugs you because she's scared, and then the lightning hits the transformer on top of the telephone pole. Have you ever seen a transformer blow up from excess electricity? It's really pretty. Like a rainbow. Only bad part is the power company saves us for last, so it's a week before we see a truck. Good thing we have a wood stove for winter. I was once told it was our own fault that we lived out in nowhere. Well, I'm sorry I don't like human noise. I'm sorry I prefer night where the nearest street lamp is 7 miles away. I'm sorry my family has known this dirt so long. I'm sorry you don't understand. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm rambling, and you deserve a story. I'm sorry, but I felt like this was important. I'm sorry if it sounds silly to talk about trees and lightning, but I don't have a choice. I'm not 87 years old, and God took away my rum. Let's start over. The country has been my home since Mom and Dad first conceived the idea of a child. I went to school 11 miles away in a little town of about 5,000 people where everybody knew everybody. You went to church not because you believe in God, but because if you didn't, some old bitch told the preacher. He was not adverse to making a house call to find out what illness or catastrophe had kept you from hearing the word of Christ. We were a tight-knit community like that. Every once in a while a new family would move to town. As tradition dictated, they were gossiped about for 2 weeks. No more, no less. It happened that when I was 12, a new family moved to town, bringing along with them 2 boys. One was 15, the other was 7. And there was nothing magical or mysterious about their arrival. I got to know them through the PTA, where our mothers volunteered us. The oldest asked me out a few years later. He just handed me this crude little piece of crumpled up paper, and it took a while to decipher this chicken scratch. I was elated when the message was clear. Any girl would be. On our first date, he got lost trying to find my house and called to get the directions. "Well, where are you?" I asked him. "On a dirt road," the receiver muttered to me. "What do you see?" "Fields and cows." Could you be any more blunt? Thus started my relationship to the man I would marry. Thus a socially awkward country girl got her first kiss. It was fall. The leaves hung over us in a passionate canopy of orange and red. The slightest cool breeze knocked them loose to cascade down. I love fall. It's my favorite season. I suggested we take a walk in the fields next door. Blushing like the virgins we were, we decided to go hand in hand. I led since he didn't know the way. The long ragweed stalks had turned brown, and the cotton pads opened to reveal a bounty of seeds that looked like paratroopers when the wind blew. I pulled him up the path made by 4-wheelers and dirt bikes. The weeds lazily sloped up to the little birch grove I was aiming for. Beneath the trees was a flat rock you could sit on. It wasn't uncommon to find a patch of flattened grass where the deer had lain. I liked it here. We curled up on a rock to relax. It was cold, so he stealthily nudged closer to me for warmth. I pretended my burning cheeks were the result of the nipping wind. We talked about the normal things new couples talk about. What's your favorite band? Isn't the English teacher a prick? Then he asked me why I had agreed to his note. I stiffened. The birch bark next to me became the most interesting thing on the planet. I confessed my feelings and told him things I won't tell you. Private things not meant to leave the loose leaf pages yet. Maybe when I'm 87, I'll tell you. It was the most natural thing to lean in and kiss his cheek. Realizing my horrible error, I whipped my head back around and started panicking. What had I just done? Stupid, stupid, stupid! He turned my head back to face him, and he kissed me. Simple as that. Just a quick, chaste little kiss. The adrenaline hit me so hard I almost fell off the rock. We were having an earthquake. The whole world had just shrunk to the boy next to me. The peeling white birch was still there, the yellow leaves still fell, the birds whistled above me. It kept going, while we stayed still. I wanted to cry, but I was never taught how you're supposed to cry when you're happy. His lips held me to reality. The cold rock beneath me became the entire planet slowly rotating. If this is how it felt with a simple kiss, what was it going to feel like when he advanced? What was it going to feel like when his lips left for more forbidden places? I don't believe my emotional dogma could take on such an onslaught. I'd melt. I wonder what it would feel like to crumble. I know for certain he would be the only one holding Elmer's glue. Miraculously, I pulled myself together. But his invading scent was still pushing at my barriers of reason. It was a thick masculine smell of Tide, cheap shampoo, Pepsi, and sweat. I can smell him now. I'm high on his smell. I wonder if that's how love is. You get addicted, and you have no choice but to obey and suffer. He pulled back, and I realized his eyes were blue. His blush matched mine. Our panting breaths were turning into fog as night set in. Time remembered my deflowered rock. So, I finally managed. Yeah, he told me. We headed back. He climbed into his little red truck and drove off with a promise to see me tomorrow at school. And that's it. I know it's not exciting, and there was no plot twist. But like I said, I'm only 20, and God is being an asshole tonight. So if you wanted something more, come back when I'm 87. Or better yet, bring rum. Until then, all I have is a little first kiss. I don't want to sound corny and say he took my heart with him in that little red truck. He probably took my lungs, or my lips, or my finger, or something. That's how the story really ended. They're his now. The Climb. Piper and Andy climbed up the mountain path as the turgid stream, ripe with snowmelt, flowed past. The stream rose up from the spring near the summit, breached a channel that coursed deep down into the valley below. Above them, the sun shone hot on new leaves that thrust eagerly up to touch the sky in welcome after the long, cold winter months. At least there was a cool breeze, thought Piper, who was trying not to slip in the mud that seemed to creep from the mountain and congeal between rocks. Piper was apprehensive about this whole endeavor. She rarely went hiking because the sweating and the heat would frizzle her curly red hair, causing it to poof out like the top of a seeding dandelion. The sunshine would break out her freckles, which she hated because it made her look 16 instead of 25. She never tanned well, and that probably had something to do with her Irish roots. Glancing back, she saw Andy a few yards off, walking along as though he owned the landscape surrounding them. While Piper would feel comfortable striding down a city sidewalk, Andy craved mountains. His face was flushed, and his long legs were bare and glistening with sweat. His eyes alighted on the trees like two little dots of sunshine as he dug his walking stick into the grooves between the rocks. This was the first time Piper had mounted a trail with him, but from that cheerful look plastered on his face, she was glad she'd done it. Andy stopped when he reached her, taking a moment for a water break. "Tired already?" he asked Piper with that off-kilter smirk that made her heart flutter. "Just waiting for you to catch up." She put her hands on her hips, and she caught her breath and calmed her heart. Dumping some of the water into his golden locks, Andy shook his head like an animal, throwing water everywhere. Piper jumped away as though he had burned her. "Don't splash me," she squeaked, and Andy laughed. "It's just a little water. Feel good, doesn't it?" he insisted, and put the bottle away. Piper admitted the cool water did feel nice, but she didn't want to give Andy the satisfaction of telling him so. If she did, he might hold it against her in playful jabs and jokes that would make the whole day drag. She'd rather this hike be as painless as possible. "How much longer until we get to the top?" she asked, changing the subject. Andy looked up at the sun towards the peak. "I'd say another few hours." He walked past her, and she followed. The path was still relatively flat and even, worn down by climbers who'd come before them. Piper adjusted the small backpack she had on her back. It was filled with spare socks, a radio, some sandwiches, bug spray, and plenty of water. She recalled Andy's scowl at the radio this morning. "What's this?" Andy asked, picking up the plastic box. "A radio," Piper had answered, snatching the box away and storing it in the pack that was sitting on the kitchen table. The remnants of her sandwich making were still on the counter, along with breakfast dishes, all of which would have to be cleaned up before they left. "Why are you packing that? The whole point of hiking is listening to nature, not that boring classical crap you call music." Andy waved his hands up in the air like a conductor, as though somehow his words were not effective enough unless he somehow demonstrated them physically. "It's not that kind of radio. It's in case we get lost," Piper said. "Asshole," her mind added. although she was hesitant to say it out loud. She really didn't want to start the morning off with a fight. "We won't get lost. We'll be on a path, and don't forget, I grew up in the mountains. If we go off the trail, we'll find our way back to the car." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing his body into hers. She hated it. He was being stubborn and rude, and all he had to do was hug her and press his face into her hair and kiss it. Then she would melt into a little puddle of manipulated ooze. She wasn't going to let him push her this time, though. This wasn't about something frivolous. This was being cautious. "I'm bringing it," she said, and shrugged him off. She refused to look at him, afraid that doing so would compel her to give in. "Well, fine then," Andy retorted, but in a joking way, as though she was a whining child. He left the kitchen, and she heard him clamber up to the stairs of the bedroom. A rumble broke Piper from her thoughts, causing her to look up. The sky had been blackened by swollen clouds saturated with rain. Andy didn't care and continued on into the elements like a man possessed. Piper cursed how adept he was at finding sure footing while she scrambled behind him. "Shouldn't we stop and head back down?" Piper asked, staring up fearfully at the tempest. She was panting and wondered if they would make it to the top with the weather like this. "A little rain never hurt anyone," Andy claimed, taking her hand and guiding her like a lamb up the steepening mountainside. The going was getting wilder. Branches reached out unchecked to scrape her, and she shivered. She hoped to God Andy knew what he was doing. The clouds grew more and more threatening, and her primordial instincts were screaming at her to get some shelter. Why couldn't Andy ever listen to reason? They should go back down or find some recess to hide in. "Andy, please, I'm scared," she confessed, feeling like a wimp for doing so, but hoping Andy would relent if she did. "Relax, babe," he said, squeezing the hand he was holding. "I won't let anything hurt you. Besides, some storms are more exciting this high up. Remember that time we went to Lake Teholm? You didn't want to go swimming at all, but when you finally got in the water, you loved it. You're scared now, but once you see how cool it is, you'll love it too." He said this with such conviction that Piper almost believed him. However, she grimaced at the memory of Lake Teholm. The reason she hadn't gone swimming wasn't because she was scared, it was because she couldn't swim. And how Andy had got her to go swimming had been downright mean in her opinion. At the lake, Piper had been standing on the dock in a slightly see-through summer dress. It was early, yet the warm wind had swept up into the dress to dance around her body and make her sweat. The sun had just crested over the height of the cliffs surrounding the lake, leaving a warm pink hue to dance upon the water. It was a crystal clear mirror for this sunrise, and Piper drank in the sight. The absence of civilization gave her the fantasy that she was the only person on earth. Suddenly, a push made her lose her balance, and she waved her arms like a bird before graciously falling off the dock. Sputtering and furious, she stood up, the water only coming to her waist, and shrieked, "Andrew Wilson!" Her lover couldn't respond because he was laughing too hard. "Lake Teholm is nothing like this," Piper asserted. "But I taught you to swim," Andy countered, as though that in itself made up for pushing her off the dock that day. Piper scowled, but she did admit it had tugged at her heartstrings to see his face scrunched up in worry and guilt when she clambered out of the water and told him she couldn't swim. She remembered he forced her to learn because he was terrified she might actually drown. Her frown turned into a small smile. That part had been fun. "Almost there," Andy told her comfortingly. "Good," she retorted. The sooner they reached the top and satisfied Andy's thirst, the sooner they could go back down. Another loud rumble ripped through the sky, making them both look up at the darkness. The torrent began not with a patter of rain, but a gush of water that split its way through the clouds to empty on the lands below. It dumped on them in multitudes, and the stream beside them swelled to splash along the river banks. Andy was drenched, and Piper panting like she was drowning now. She reached forward to cling to the back of his shirt, needing an anchor. She started shivering uncontrollably, and her teeth chattered. Piper was pissed at him for this. They would be back to the car by now if Andy had just turned around when she had asked. And the radio was probably wet and broken, leaving them cut off out here. "Andy!" she cried over the wind. "Andy, we should turn back!" He shook his head and thrust his walking stick forward. "It's just a little further. We can make it!" Andy cried out, picking up the pace. The cloud barrier stood before them like a gray wall of dense fog. They breached it, the clouds surrounding them and making Piper feel as if she was at the bottom of a lake. There was the summit. Andy hauled Piper up the last few yards to the mountain's tip, free of greenery and earth. A solid chunk of granite jutting up into the cloud as it swirled around them. Piper hung on to him, arms wrapped around his waist and head buried in his soaked chest. Adrenaline rushed through her, and all her nerves to tingle like her body was on fire. "We're gonna get blown off the mountain!" Piper yelled at him, feeling the wind tug at her. "Look," Andy urged, his voice strangely calm. She peeled her head away to gaze around at the heart of the storm. It was hypnotizing and addictive, and she thought it a wonder that they were alive in all the chaos. The clouds thrashed around the beating rain that condensed on their skin. She looked up at Andy. He stood in enraptured silence. His sharp eyes cut through the clouds, and his wet hair rippled and stuck to his jaw. Her knees felt weak at the sight, and she hugged him tighter to keep from sinking down. Pleased and at peace, Andy kissed her hair before gravity tugged the couple back down the steep, difficult path. Piper broke the surface of the clouds, gasping for air. Andy could see she was shaking. "Let's head back down now," he said softly. "I hate you," she coughed. "I know," he said, as though it was obvious. "But it was brilliant, wasn't it?" Andy used his walking stick to keep them from tumbling down the slope. Piper followed close behind with her hands on his shoulders for support. "Yes," she admitted, knowing he would hold it against her. The climb was thrilling, but the way down was arduous. Blossom. Miranda thrived on order. Her books were alphabetized, her calendar color-coded, and she wore black like it was a badge of honor. It was one of the many reasons she thrived in marketing research. Lines of numbers and spreadsheets that allowed her to map out trends in their target audience. Currently, she worked for Do Botanics, a company that made skincare serums and lotions. Their main draw was all organic ingredients and being parabens-free. They boasted things like using crushed walnuts instead of microbeads and giving farmers in disadvantaged countries livable wages. Stuff people liked to hear until you told them the price. So it was her job to make the price seem worth it, to spend her hours of surveys and focus groups into a message the average person could easily digest. That was what she was paid to do. The email that asked her to come down to talk with her boss didn't faze her. She often had one-on-one meetings with Ryan to go over numbers. Miranda grabbed a second cup of coffee for him, figuring the brownie points could be added to her tab. It was always good to be friendly with the boss. She dropped her saddlebag off at her meticulously organized desk. No pictures of family or unnecessary knickknacks. Her one small piece of clutter was a canvas print of Claude Monet's Poplars on the banks of the River Epte. It was a personal favorite she added when an intern had mistaken her desk as unoccupied. After changing her sensible walking shoes into a pair of black pumps, Miranda carried her coffees from her desk down to the corner office. "Good morning," The peppy voice of Taylor had her turning her head. Taylor worked in social media and always greeted Miranda regardless of mood. She had brunette hair, a blinding smile, and perfectly contoured makeup. Exactly the kind of person that made up Do Botanic's customer base. "Mornin'," Miranda said with a nod. "So this morning, I bumped into this guy on my way up. Very attractive," Taylor said, her voice low. Office gossip. Miranda tried to keep out of such things, but Taylor thrived on it. "How nice," Miranda said. "Anyway, so we're talking, and before I know it, he follows me all the way up here. Then Ryan is shaking his hand. I guess he's a famous artist here to do some contract work," Taylor said. "I'm actually on my way to see Ryan," Miranda said, holding up the 2 coffees. She glanced at the clock. It was still early, but she really didn't want to talk about Taylor's romantic pursuits. Miranda herself hadn't had anyone significant in several years. It was just her and Sam, her long-haired orange tabby cat. Some might say she was married to her job, but she was just fine with Sam being the only male in her life. She was too busy for the drama of romance and heartbreak. She hurried away to Ryan's office. The door was open, and she stepped inside to find her boss chatting with another man. The stranger stood with an effortless kind of confidence, broad-shouldered and tall, with dark tousled hair and trimmed beard that gave him a rugged charm. He wore a fitted charcoal shirt that clung to a well-maintained frame, paired with paint-splattered jeans. His eyes were a striking steel blue, too sharp and too aware, like he'd seen more of the world than most people in this building ever would. Handsome didn't quite cover it. He looked like he belonged in a high-end cologne ad set in some fog-drenched forest. Miranda felt her heart skip a beat and blinked. Why did this man bring on such a strong feeling of déjà vu? "You brought me coffee. You're spoiling me," Ryan said with a grin, standing up from the desk. "Habit," Miranda replied, snapping out of whatever that was. She walked forward to hand him one of the cups. Before she could drink from the second one, the man plucked it out of her hand like he'd been expecting it. "Thanks," he said, lifting it in a casual toast before taking a sip. Miranda opened her mouth to correct him, but paused. Something about that voice tickled the edge of her memory. Deep, familiar, tinged with sarcasm in a simple word. Her brows pulled together slightly as she studied him more closely. "It's been a while, Miranda," the man said, with a maddeningly confident smile. Ryan chuckled. "You two know each other already?" Miranda narrowed her eyes just slightly. Her brain was working faster than her mouth, dragging through dusty mental files of shared art studios and critiques and... Oh, God! Her stomach did an unexpected flip. "Finn Hartley?" she asked disbelievingly. "Guilty," he said. "Nice to see you again." Of course his memory was sharper than hers. Of course he looked like a movie star now. Of course the universe would throw him back into her life just when she'd finally gotten comfortable. And of course he'd taken her damn coffee. Ryan clapped his hands once, clearly pleased. "Well, this saves me from having to make introductions." Miranda's gaze flicked from Ryan to Finn. The last time she'd seen him, he was living off caffeine and weed, smudged in charcoal and arguing with professors over the definition of commercial sellout. Not this. Not a man who looked like he owned a cabin in the woods where he carved sculptures of gods out of marble. "What are you doing here?" Miranda asked before she could stop herself. "Contract work," Finn said smoothly. "You know, advertising art. Gotta make a living somehow." Miranda's eyes narrowed. That definitely did not sound like the old Finn, who believed capitalism was the worst thing to happen to art. "I guess you finally got tired of living the starving artist lifestyle," she said with no small amount of sass. He deserved it after taking her drink. Ryan held up his hands, clearly amused but trying to stay neutral. "Play nice. You two are going to be working together." Miranda turned to her boss, stunned. "I'm sorry. What?" "I've been talking with research and development," Ryan said. "We want to launch a spring campaign to push Do Botanic's new Blossom line. Big refresh, new visuals, a bold angle. Organic meets elevated luxury." "And you need a painter for that?" Miranda asked, brows raised. "Not just a painter," Ryan said. a style, something evocative. Finn's work with natural textures fits our new direction perfectly. The idea is to create a visual centerpiece that blends into digital and print, something more artistic than a stock photo. Finn added, almost as an afterthought, and I agreed on the condition that my work not be edited and my name won't get swept away with the copyright. I needed to work with someone who's familiar with the company's themes and has an artistic background. When I heard you were here, I asked if it could be you. Miranda couldn't believe it. After everything they'd been through, Finn had orchestrated this hostile takeover of her workspace. How many nights had she fallen asleep crying? How many bottles of wine had been drunk? How many years had she put between her and Finnegan and his damned adorable smile and passion about life and art that made her heart sing? And no, she was past that. She was a professional. Miranda took a breath and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Wonderful, Miranda said. Perfect, Finn said, smirking over the rim of her coffee. She was already wondering how she was going to survive this. The rest of the morning, thankfully, consisted of going over job roles. Miranda was to keep Finn on deadlines, ensure everything stayed on brand while still allowing him creative freedom. When the final art piece was approved, Taylor would launch a full-scale social media and print campaign. They had 2 months before the Blossom line launched. It might as well have been 2 years, judging by the cold knot of dread twisting in Miranda's stomach. When the meeting wrapped, she stood stiffly. She didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked out, letting her heel clicks punctuate her exit. Back at her desk, Miranda checked the clock. Still hours until lunch. Her body ached for the caffeine Finn had stolen. From her peripheral vision, she caught a glimpse of him heading towards the elevator. "Goodbye, Mr. Hartley," Taylor said, voice syrupy sweet. Miranda turned just enough to see Taylor waving flirtatiously. "I look forward to seeing you around the office," she added with a coy smile. Miranda mentally gasped. Finn smiled back, of course. That was his specialty, making every pretty girl feel like she was the one in a million instead of one in a long, blurry line of women. Miranda turned back to her computer, jaw tight. At least she knew better. There was no way she would let Finn get under her skin again. Miranda knocked on the studio door with more force than necessary. "Finn! It's Miranda." Inside, she heard the scrape of a stool. "Come in." She stepped into the temporary studio they'd set up for him out of an unused conference room. Chairs and tables were stacked against a wall, and the space was filled with easels, open sketchbooks, and leaking paint tubes, and the faint sense of turpentine. It was chaos, but Finn probably found it blissful. The man himself stood by the window, sleeves rolled up and pencil tucked behind his ear. "You're late," he said, without looking at her. "You're lucky I showed up at all," she muttered. Setting her tablet on the desk, she scowled at the empty containers of takeout food and cans of soda. Finn turned, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Ah, there's the Miranda I remember." She crossed her arms. "Let's get something straight. I'm here to help manage this campaign. That's it." "Sure," he said, dragging a stool toward his canvas. "But you did bring me coffee last time." That felt a little nostalgic. "I didn't bring it for you," she snapped. "That was mine, and you stole it." He shrugged. "Still tasted like a peace offering." She rolled her eyes and turned on her tablet. "Have you sketched anything yet?" Finn reached behind him and held up a page. It was rough, but compelling. Twisting vines, petals unfolding in exaggerated detail, bold brush strokes that looked alive. There was something moody and raw about it, like he was trying to turn nature into emotion, or the opposite. Miranda hated how good it was. "It's a start," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "It needs to feel more elevated, less emotional." "You hired me," he said. "Emotional is part of the package." "I didn't hire you," she corrected. "Ryan did. And then I was told to work with you." Finn gave her a long look. "But you didn't say no." Miranda hesitated, then looked away. I don't say no to good work, even if it comes from a man who once tried to convince me art school was a prison disguised as self-expression that destroyed true creativity. He grinned. Still true. Then what are you doing here? She challenged. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. I could ask you the same thing. What's an artist doing working on marketing for a skincare company? I'm not an artist anymore, Miranda said. What? Finn exclaimed, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Unlike some people, I couldn't run off to Europe and find myself. I realized painting is fine for a hobby, but I needed something stable, so I changed my major to business, Miranda said evenly, while looking pointedly at her tablet while she typed in her password. It hadn't just been that, of course. It had also been because after Finn left for France, she had quit painting altogether. Too many memories of long evenings spent together in the studio, their shared love for art bleeding into a different type of passion. A silence stretched between them, too loaded to be professional and too familiar to be comfortable. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead felt suddenly loud. I'm sorry, Finn said, like those two words could erase everything. Miranda grit her teeth, fighting to snap back at him. It wouldn't do any good. Miranda finally spoke, her voice lower. Let's just get through the campaign. Finn's eyes searched hers. If you say so. They both thankfully turned their attention to the business at hand. Miranda outlined Du Botanic's motto, for a skin that grows, with the overreaching theme that skin was an organ that needed to be treated with care. The Blossoms line's main draw was essential oils made from various flowers like primrose and lavender. They talked about logos, the list of flowers used, and incorporating empty space so Taylor could have room to edit in the product copy. When they had discussed everything on Miranda's bullet points, she shut down her tablet. I believe that will be all, she said, her tone clipped but not cold. I'll leave you to your work and check in before I leave today. Finn nodded, then hesitated. You don't have to go right away, he said. The light in here's better. You could stay. Just for a minute if you wanted. Miranda paused, her hand hovering near the door handle. He wasn't asking her to talk, wasn't even asking for forgiveness, just proximity. A flicker of something that used to exist between them. I have a lot to do, she said. Her voice was softer now. Of course, he murmured, turning back to the canvas. It wasn't until she stepped out into the hall she realized her heart was hammering in her chest. Nothing had happened, and yet her stomach rolled with anxiety. Or were those butterflies? Shaking it off, Miranda hurried back to her desk. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm Miranda hadn't expected. It was her job to check in, review progress, and provide notes. But each time she entered the studio, something unspoken hovered between them. Finn never crossed any lines, always an infuriating gentleman. But she caught him staring at her when she went over font choices in a way that left her blushing. He brought her several coffees, remembering after years that she liked it with oat milk and no sugar. Every so often a hand was brushed and a compliment offered. Miranda was desperately trying to keep things professional. But Finn had this unnerving way of getting right under her skin. He teased. She snapped. She offered critiques, and he listened, sometimes. The more they worked together, the more years fell away, and they slipped into old habits. Without meaning to, Miranda found herself lingering. It started with a few extra minutes to discuss color palettes. Then, somehow, it was an hour later, and she was standing there, arms crossed, watching him work while pretending to check emails. Halfway into the campaign, Miranda walked into the studio and halted just inside the door. Finn didn't notice her at first. He was focused, brush in hand and eyes narrowed in concentration. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching flecks of paint on his arms. The canvas was no longer just a sketch. It was coming alive with vines that framed a woman, her face half turned and her hair made of blooming petals. A goddess of the forest, showing an expression of sorrow and strength. But that wasn't what made her gasp. She knew that face. Miranda saw the soft curve of the woman's cheek and the sharp nose in the mirror every morning. But the eyes were what undid her. Finn had painted them as though he'd reached back in time and retrieved some untamed version of herself. A young woman she'd left behind in favor of domestic stability. Miranda didn't say a word. She didn't even move. She just stood there, transfixed, her throat tight, her eyes burning with something she couldn't name. Because this was what it felt like, standing beside him in a quiet room, watching him lose himself in the act of creation, and feeling that he saw her in ways she couldn't explain. Finally, Finn turned and caught her watching. "You like it?" he asked quietly, as if he were asking about something far more intimate than a painting. Miranda blinked, caught in the moment. She straightened, smoothed an invisible wrinkle on her blouse. Her hand brushed beneath her eye, suddenly wiping the tear budding there. The flowers could be more pronounced. Finn looked at her like she was a skittish animal about to bolt. He held out a paintbrush and she went to him without fighting. He handed it to her, then gently guided the tip to the canvas. His touch was reverent. Then, with quiet certainty, he pulled her onto his lap. His hands came to rest on her hips, grounding her there. "Show me," he challenged. So she did. She stopped worrying about the paint smudging her blazer or the way her breath hitched when his hand brushed her waist. She lost herself in the dance of the brush. Color spilled freely, and something inside her unfurled like the flowers on the canvas. "I miss this," Finn said, his voice low beside her ear. "You left," Miranda whispered, not bothering to hide the tremble in her words this time. His grip on her tightened slightly. "I wanted you to come with me." Miranda's breath caught. The brush paused mid-stroke. "You never asked," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Finn's hands stilled against her hips. "I didn't think I had to. You knew what that trip meant to me." "But you didn't have to go," she snapped, pulling slightly away to look at him. "What about what we had? Did that mean nothing?" His expression twisted. "Of course it meant something. Miranda, we were just kids, and you were always so driven, and every time you spoke, it was like you had your whole life planned out." She looked at him, eyes glassy and bitter. "So you just abandoned me." "I was scared," Finn admitted. "I was such a mess back then. I worried I was holding you back, and you'd come to hate me." Miranda blinked, stunned. "Hate you? I loved you," she said. There was no air in the room now, just memories painted into the vines on canvas, weaving them together like different flowers in a garden. One a high-class rose manicured to perfection, the other a wildflower trying to coax the rose back to its natural state. "You hurt me," she said at last. "I know," he said regretfully. His hand slipped to her jaw and turned her head to face him. Miranda leaned in first, and Finn met her halfway. The kiss wasn't explosive. It was a slow apology that sweetened with each touch. His hands dug in deeper, like he was afraid she might vanish. And she kissed him like she hadn't been kissed in years. They kissed, like when they were young and stupid and still learning to make love. When they finally pulled away, Miranda rested her forehead against his and closed her eyes. "This doesn't mean anything," she lied. "I know," he said, knowing it did. When Miranda stepped into the office, there was a noticeable difference in her stride. Her hair was loosely pinned instead of tightly coiled, and the guarded tension she usually wore like armor had eased into something almost relaxed. She dropped her saddlebag at her desk and took a moment to admire her space. Claude Monet's poplars on the banks of the River Epte, now shared space with photos of her tabby cat Sam, and a print of Finn's final painting. Taylor bounced over, beaming and clutching a printed mock-up of the campaign's online launch. "Blossom's going viral," she said breathlessly. "Engagement's through the roof. Everyone's obsessed with the art direction. Whatever magic you two stirred up in that studio, it's working." Miranda offered a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "That's great," she said. Taylor scrunched her brow at her. "You look different. New haircut?" "No," Miranda said as she turned on her laptop. "Well, you look good," Taylor said. "Anyway, I gotta get back to work. Ryan wants me to talk to advertising about Blossom's new commercial. See you at lunch." "Oh, I'm actually meeting Finn for lunch," Miranda said offhandedly. Taylor's eyes widened and she smiled. "Oh, really?" she said, curious with a hint of tease. "So that magic continued after his contract ended, I take it." Miranda glanced up, arcing a brow. "It's not serious," she said, a little too quickly. "We're just catching up. Friends can do that." Taylor grinned knowingly, but didn't push. "Sure, just catching up." As the younger woman walked off, Miranda leaned back in her chair. She wasn't sure what this thing with Finn was, but this time she wouldn't let him go easily. Her hand reached out to the print of Finn's painting and brushed the face there. A bud that had spent too long clenched in the darkness and finally daring to bloom. From my pen to your ears, thanks for joining me for this reading of 3 Silver Tales. If you enjoy these stories and are interested in more, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so you can come back for more stories spun in silver.